Yesterday we began the Maimah, the second Maimah, Yechayeinu Miyomayim, and a significant portion of it was the mashal of a king and their coronation. And we concluded that a king's coronation is a significant moment in their leadership. That it's specifically through the coronation that it develops and it arouses within them the deeper notion of a crown. And a crown is a rotzen imlucha, a desire to lead and to rule. And the manner in which that most inner and deep aspect of the king is cultivated and stimulated is through the people. The coronation comes from the nation that is coronating that king. Okay? So we're going to start today, just the last few lines of what we did yesterday, 8 lines from the bottom of Amud Yud Daled, 2 words in V'nimtza. You have it? Okay. So V'nimtza Muvim Mizas, the conclusion of our previous lengthy explanation of a coronation is the Gadlus HaMelech Walidei HaHaktorah B'Kesem Malchus, that the greatness of a sovereign, of a king, is achieved through the coronation with a royal crown. And that is made possible through the nation submitting themselves to the rule of this individual. Okay, so that's our mashal. That's the takeaway that we want to take away from this mashal. So now we're going to go and talk about the way this is Lamaila, the way this is in the Spheres Elyonis. We're going to talk about in Atzilus, and we're going to talk about the relationship between Zon Malchus and the relationship that they have to the Moichin, to Chachma and Bina, and the relationship they have to Keser, both Pnimius HaKeser and Chitzenis HaKeser. And probably this section, from here to the middle of Amud Tezayin, is the most dense material in the context of sort of Kabbalistic terminology and the lack of elaboration and explanation. It's a difficult section, and it's worth remembering what Rabbi Landau wrote in his Zichronos, that he remembers in the year Tofresh Ayin Ches that he was one of the Chezrim, and he went into Chazal the Maimah that the Rebbe Shabbat said, and there was a section of difficult stuff relating to Kabbalistic texts, and they were asking questions on the Kabbalah section of the Maimah, and the Rebbe Rashab said to them, "Was du a shaykhs mit the Kabbalah? What connection do you have to these types of concepts?" Which indicates that the Rebbe Rashab didn't expect necessarily that the Bachrim should become so engrossed and in the technicalities that are sometimes spoken about in a Maimah. It doesn't mean that we don't have to understand it. The Pirush HaMilas l'chol hapachos we should know, but admittedly it's quite difficult, and you'll be amused if you look in the English translation of the Maimah. Reading in English makes it even more complicated and doesn't help you. So there's no real way around this, and we just have to make our way through it. It's not easy for me either. So have a bisur rachmanis. I'll try my best, and you'll try your best. Okay. So similarly, this notion of the coronation we've just described can be understood above. Just like the king, the earthly king's greatness stems from the fact that he's coronated with a royal crown, similarly the supernal king, which is a reference to Zah of Atzilus, the 6 middays, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod of Atzilus, the greatness of that darga in Atzilus stems from its crown. And what's its crown? Its crown is brought down and afforded it by the level of bina of Atzilus, just like we have in the pasuk, that it's the crown which his mother placed on him, and so we similarly say that Chachma is the level of father, and bina is the level of mother. Why is Chachma and bina the level of father and mother? That you have, just like we've discussed in the example of a sexual union, that you have the nakuda, you have the concise in the semen of the father, you have condensed the whole identity of the father, and it's through the mother that the child, after conception, is developed and expanded upon. Similarly, in the moshel of Chachma and Bina, Chachma is considered to be like a nakuda, a point, and Bina is the elaboration of the essential and the kernel of the idea. So that is the relation of Chachma and Bina, and that's why they're also related to father and mother. So Zah receives its crown from Bina. So Yesh Leimar, and this is similar to the way we've described the notion of Bina above, that the additional level of Bina that we described is the Koyach Haiskalas Ahelem Hu Bina Davka. The Bina is this Bina quality. When we say Bina Yisera Nitna Be'isha, we don't necessarily mean specifically the Darga of Bina, we mean the concept of Bina. That Dibur, when we were talking about it in context of Dibur, that Dibur has this greater quality, has this greater Bina quality, because Bina in Seder Shtalshlus is the first example of a sort of a revelatory koyach, because Chochmah is still already behelem and concealed. So Bina enables the expansion, the elaboration of an idea, and just like Dibur has the koyach to expand an idea, so therefore we claim that it has a Bina quality. So that's what we explained above. The koyach is galas ahelem hu b'bina davka. So it makes sense that Zah, in order to have its relationship with a crown, with Keser, it should come about because of Bina. Because Bina is the tool with which everything is expressed and and revealed. Now, I just want to say one general point here that might be useful in what we're going to explain. The main difference between the spheres of Atzilus and Keser is the spheres of Atzilus are an Or Pnimi and Keser is an Or Makif. What is the difference between an Or Pnimi and an Or Makif? Or Pnimi is Lefi Erech is always going to be defined and limited to the extent of the thing that it's going to become enclosed in. The purpose of an Or Pnimi is to become enclosed in something. So the Or HaChachma is intended to be enclosed in the Kli HaChachma, the Or HaBina in the Kli HaBina, the Or HaChesed in the Kli HaChesed. So the nature of an Or Pnimi is to be, that's why it's called Olam HaTikun. It's because it's a contained and a containable Or. Whereas an Or Makif is not mislabish in Kalim. Everything in relation to the Or Makif is the same. The Makif is Miloshin, it encompasses everything equally. So they're two very different tenues, different tchunes, different characteristics that you have of an Or Pnimi and an Or Makif. So you would assume, so what would you assume? That they can't have much of a healthy relationship with each other. They can't have a relationship which is ba'ifin shel kiruv. Because if there is a gilui of the Or Makif, then all of the it would overwhelm the Or Pnimi, and the Or Pnimi won't be able to be an Or Pnimi. In order for the Or Pnimi to be an Or Pnimi, it can't have such an intense gilui of the Or Makif. So they're not they're not so coherent and compatible. So when we're saying that Zah of Atzilus has a gilui of Keser, is an achievement, right? It's a chidush, it's an uftu. So it's similar if you take it in the moshel of a person, that when a person is processing an intellectual idea, or they're having an emotional experience, it's going to be suited to their capacity. They're only going to be able to conceptualize things that they're capable of understanding. And they're also only going to experience things to the extent they have the emotional intelligence, the emotional depth and breadth to be able to experience that emotional experience. Yeah? Now, if you were to tap into a far deeper experience of the nefesh, such as the rotzen nefesh, a deep desire that is not in the context. When a person wants something, it's not in the context of necessarily their limitations. People want a lot of things that they can't achieve. But what do we say? You should learn specifically in the things where you want to, because through the gilu of keich harotzen, it can transform, it can elevate the keiches pnimiyim, the seichel and the midas. Right? So we're always trying to create a possibility to elevate the keiches pnimiyim, that they should have a shaykhus to the keiches makifim. So similarly, if Zoh of Atzilus, which is normal, say the Ishtalshalus, is going to be an Ishtalshal from the Meichin, from Seichel V'chachim V'nadas of Atzilus, you then get Zoh of Atzilus. So it's going to be a Seder Ishtalshus of where the Gilu of Elikus is going to be at every darga diminished and reduced, in order to be Lefi Erech, the next level that you're talking about in the 10 Madrigas, the 9 Madrigas, if we're not including Malchus. Now, what we're describing here is the possibility that Zoh, if you want Zoh to achieve greatness, it has to have a Gili of Kesser. Just like in the Moshel, if a king is, in order to be great, in order for the king to be great, he has to be crowned. So Zoh needs to be crowned. The Keiches Pnimiyim of Atzilus need to have a Gili of Kesser. That's what we're describing. This is what we're trying to describe. The enhancement of Zoh by having a Gilui of Kesser, a Gilui of the Keiches Makifim. So you can appreciate that similarly in a person's own experience, in their Keiches Pnimiyim, when you have the drive of Rotzing, when you really want something, then even if ordinarily you wouldn't be able, your intellectual or your emotional abilities would be limited on an average day, you won't be able to reach those heights. Like it described in Yechayeinu about the women who are able to tinus the arguments that the Tanoim and Amiroim can argue, or that the Tanoim and Amiroim have to deal with. Where does it come from? Because it was negeya to them, or something more pnimi. So they were able to have reach levels of intellectual achievement that they maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to achieve. So similarly over here, Zoh is gaining a huge amount by its receiving this coronation, just like an ordinary king would. Okay, now we're going to add another detail in this process of how Zoh receives a Kesser. How does the king of Atzilus, the Zoh of Atzilus, receive its crown? So we described how it receives its crown through Bina. Bina is the source of it. So we have a little bit more of a direct relationship between Bina and Zoh and a crown. But Gam lefi mashe pirish shezeu mashe tiferes de'ema nasa kesel leZoh. So in the Sifri Kabbalah, you have an expression tiferes de'ema nasa kesel leZoh. The tiferes of Bina, Ema, the mother being Bina, becomes the Kesser of Zoh. So this level, so obviously each sphere in Atzilus is a part of Sholim. It has all the other spheres. So in the Gaboy, in the structure, in the parts of Bina, the level of Tiferes of Bina, which is encompasses its whole level, its lower level, its Zayin Tachtoinim, its level of Midas, as opposed to its level of Meichin. So the Midas Sheba Meichin, like a person can have, that when when they're processing something intellectually, there is the when a person gets excited, but it's not. You can have you can be stimulated by an idea, but that's not a midah yet. It's called midah shebemoichin. Right? You have it's not quite an emotional thing. It's an intellectual pleasure, intellectual enjoyment, or an intellectual tzi, a drawing close to something because of its attractiveness. That's what we call midah shebemoichin. So in Atzilus, you have a level called midah shebemoichin, tiferes de'ema, and that becomes the keser of Zah. So you're talking gamkein. It's also possible for these two ideas to be similar, because till now we were saying the keser comes from keser, and it comes through bina. Now we're saying that bina itself becomes the keser of Zah. Once you talk about kesarim, you have to understand there's a whole different stage of ishtalshlus going on. That ordinarily we talk about ishtalshlus, that there's these dargas. You've got chachma batzilus, bina batzilus, everything's in the oy pnimi. When we're talking about the eiris pnimium, they come down in an orderly fashion, and there is a marked difference between one level and another level. The levels become very distinct because that's the nature of an oy pnimi. That the oy that was shaykh to a higher level is too great for a lower level, and once it has through tzimtzumim, it becomes diminished and reduced to be able to be mislabish in a lower madrega. But by ksarim, they have their own hishtalshlus, such that you would there's a closer parallel between the keser of bria with the keser of atzilus than there is, say, chochma of atzilus to keser of atzilus. So the ksarim, they have their own association with each other, such that the keser of bria is mitzad gilu eir closer to keser of atzilus than chochma of atzilus is to keser of atzilus. In the Miyomayim is sort of like the Ur-Mimer that explains this. So once we're talking about in Ksarim, they have their own interlinking relationship. We say that Chachma, when we talk about Chachma from the Pasuk in Eiv, Chachma mi ayin timatze. Chachma is found to exist from nothing. The development of a Chachma is something like where someone has an idea. Where did it come from? You know where it came from. It came from ayin. It came from nowhere. Ayin miloshin any day. You don't know where it comes from. But on a tifa level, ayin means a level which is itself not musak. A deeper level, which is the level of Kesser. I'm talking about Atzilus. Chachma of Atzilus comes from the ayin of Kesser. It's like finding a lost object or a new object. You discover something which you know where it came from. You found something, you know where it came from. Chachma is such a thing. It exists, it comes into being, but we don't know where it comes from. Chachma of Atzilus has this it's not this close relationship with Kesser of Atzilus. Chachma of Atzilus doesn't have this close relationship with Kesser of Atzilus. It's like a yesh ma'ayin. You wouldn't know it came from there. It has a richuk ha'erech. It has such a distinctiveness from Kesser of Atzilus. It's like a completely separate thing. So when we talk about the Chachma of Atzilus, we say that it comes from Kesser in a manner of yesh ma'ayin. But when you talk about ksarim, the crowning, the Oir Makif, that's been an Oir Pnimi. How does this Oir Pnimi, called Chachma of Atzilus, emanate from the Kesser? That's Derech Yesh Mi'ayin. There's no natural progression. You can't evolve an Oir Makif into an Oir Pnimi. If you sort of like do enough tzimtzumim on the Oir Makif, eventually it will become an Oir Pnimi. No, the very concept of an Oir Makif is that it's not Shaykh al Pnimi. So there has to be such a tzimtzum of a bri yesh ma'ayin, al derech yesh ma'ayin. That's where Chochmah emanates from Kesser. But the Ksarim is not like that. Eiris Makifim can correlate with each other. Shehem b'derech ishtalshlus. Sheyesh lehem shaychus elazeh, and they all have a relationship with each other. Kiyudu mavu b'mokim acher hahefresh ben ishtalshlus ila ba'alul yesh me'ayin, like we explained in other places. The broad difference between when we talk about yesh ma'ayin and we talk about ila ba'alul. What's the difference in yesh ma'ayin and ila ba'alul? Yesh ma'ayin, the yesh doesn't have a close relationship with its ayin. In order for the yesh to emanate from the ayin, there has to be a tzimtzum, such a tzimtzum which is like it's b'derech diluk. It's like it's a completely alternative mode of being. Whereas ila va'olul, there's a closeness between the ila to the olul. And the olul relates to the ila. So what we're saying over here is that chokhmah from Kesser is like yesh ma'ayin. Whereas Kesser of Bria from Kesser Datzilus is like ila va'olul.
So when we say that the Kesser, the Bria, is higher than Chochmah Datzilus, are we not necessarily saying that the Eir itself is necessarily higher, but the fundamental fact that it's a Makif makes it higher, or that the Eir itself is just a higher Eir?
It's an Eir Makif, yeah.
So is it just a different gather of Eir trying to say? So it will always be higher than Chochmah Datzilus. So if you don't have Yesh Ma'ayin, so if you had Makif Da'asiyah, it would still be higher than Chochmah Datzilus. So it's not because of the Eir, just because of the gather of Eir makes it higher. So it's level 1, and then the Hashtalshlus is...
It explains the Yesh Me'ayin will bechinas Richuk Ha'arech.
So what's the point of there being a Hashtalshlus from Kesser of Atzilus Kesser de Bria?
What's the point?
I mean, comparatively, it's not doing much. What's the difference?
What's it doing?
So you have Kesser Atzilus is the same thing as Kesser de Bria?
It's not the same thing, no.
So what's the difference? Is the Hashtalshlus? Why do you need a Hashtalshlus there, B'chalal? If it's anyway even higher than Chochmah Datzilus is so high, what's a Hashtalshlus exactly going to do? It's just a different type of early gamri.
The objective is to achieve the hamshachas ha'oir, both the oir makif and the oir pnimi, to achieve the creation of Elam Hazim. The oir makif, as we're going to see, which is connected to Malchus as well, Kesser Malchus, is in order to facilitate existence, because existence can only come about through this Keach Makif, which can produce things. Nothing else can get produced otherwise. It's going to get produced according to the sort of the darga of that oilam in which it's in. But mitzad, it's geder, it's not in makif. So fundamentally, it has more in common with the Kesser of Bria, will have more in common with the Kesser of Atzilus than Chochmah Atzilus could ever have. Because they're Ba'ifan of Kiruv.
So what's the point of a tzimtzum for Kesser Atzilus, Kesser Bria?
So why do you need to...
B'chalal. It's anyway...
Who says it's much of a tzimtzum?
You say there's a tzimtzum?
It's a process. I don't know how much of a tzimtzum it is.
So you're saying the process itself is just to latch onto Bria, so to speak?
Every olam has to have its kesser, which gives it its truth, in a sense. It's shaykhus to the emes.
So it's not necessarily you need a tzimtzum to come to Bina, it's that because it becomes a makif for Bina, it's a makif for Bina.
What's Bina got to do with it?
Makif to Bria. So it's not, it don't need a tzimtzum to come to makif, to become makif of Bria. But once you become makif of Bria, you become a Bina dika makif.
But then you can start the whole process again. Then you can have Chochmah Bria being Yesh Ma'ayin from the Kesser of Bria, and you go through the Nishtalshel again.
Oh, so it has to be. So that's how it works. So Chochmah of Bria doesn't come from Malchus of Atzilus?
Well, you're going to see soon that Malchus of Atzilus and Kesser of Bria are intimately connected.
Are they the same thing?
Wait a second. Wait a second, you're going to see. Don't forget, what is our primary goal over here? To explain Malchus. To explain the Makabel. So wait. Top of the next page, you'll see. So the Yechayeinu bechinas richel ka'erech. Ma she'en ki nishtalshlus ila ba'olu bechinas kiruv. So as I just explained, that there is, in order to achieve that there should be a yesh coming out of an ayin, there has to be a richel ka'erech. They can't be associated with any closeness, which is not the case with ila ba'olu. Or kumekeni shleima k'shetifer as the emanasa kesel azor. So similarly, when we say this, that the tiferes of Eima, the tiferes of Bina, the midrash of Meichin of Bina becomes the Keser of Zah, which is not like what we said before. We said that Bina draws down the Keser onto Zah, which is the different Keser, which is the Keser of Atzilus. But here we're saying it's Bina itself becomes the Keser. They're all connected. The dagger of Bina that becomes a Keser of Zah is a Keser. So it's a Keser, then it's connected to the Keser of Atzilus. So the two things are connected and are not separate notions. When does Zah get crowned with this crown through Bina? Dafka on its wedding day, on the Chasna. Meaning the time when it becomes connected and associated with Malchus of Atzilus. Hashpa b'malchus, for the purpose of having hashpa in Malchus. So nimshach b'zog gilu eid el yinyesa. So Zah has to receive a much more than it ordinarily has. Ordinarily it's no pnimi. Say the shtalshlus has a normal degree of elikus. And then, in order for it to have a relationship with Malchus, it's zeicha to an atara. It wears a crown. Just like as we said in our moshel. The king becomes great through wearing a crown, and the crown is achieved through the people. Similarly, Zah Atzilus becomes greater through having a crown, and the reason why it gets a crown, it's zeicha to the Keser of Atzilus, is because of Malchus. So Nimsha b'zagilu elin yesa, bu b'chinas eira Keser. So in Zah, there's a gilu of eira Keser. Zah is elevated, and has a greater gilu eir. All because of its relationship with Malchus.
So even before Malchus is, so to speak, created, it's already great. So the chiddush,
it's not like great's not the right word. I mean,
it's already got something superior, something special about it. It's not that through being connected with Zah, then it's misbarred that it's really great. It's so even great that Zah has to become greater to even match it.
Correct. Just like we said with Eisis Hadibur, it's not just that when a person speaks, then it's Niskala, that Dibur is Mushush in Etzem HaNefesh. We said that the very reason why a human being even conceptualizes an idea is because a person is a medaber, a person is a speaker, and that speaking, a person wants to speak. The kavanah is to speak, and a person wants to speak something that makes sense. So therefore, it generates in the person intellectual and emotional consciousness to have something to talk about. And then when a person speaks b'poyel, there's an even greater gilui from the etzem, that the person conceptualizes ideas even to a greater degree. Because initially it's mugbul, and then it becomes expansive.
And Keser is makif?
Crown surrounds you.
And we just said that an A that's makif, and there's an A that's pnimi. And a makif can't become a pnimi.
Ordinarily, these things are separate
so
dargahs.
Does the pnimi become makif then?
No, it's the hashpa. They become, they're zeicha to that. There is a chibur of that. So it's usually something that is very difficult to achieve. Just like in the human being, in order for them to develop their koyach hamalucha and to reveal their koyach hamalucha comes through hard work. It's not we call a helam sheyeshnim metzias. Because everything ultimately emanates from Hashem, everything is capable of having this chibur of the makif and the pnimi. But to achieve that is an achievement.
That makes it sound like it's just another level in Ishtalshalus, not a different. If it's a really different idea, then they can't be.
Just like we said, right? Persons, the boundaries we're going to, and this is going to become a sticking point, a difficulty, which we're going to deal with much more in the later Miyomayim, is how do you have bli gvul and gvul? It's a question of how do you have bli gvul and gvul? Yeah, how do you have bli gvul and gvul at the same time? So you're right, it needs more hasbara, and we're going to talk about it a lot later. But for the meantime, this is at least the kernel of the idea that we're going to be developing. And that's why I think this is actually really important, this section. When we come to the later Miyomayim, I have a note here on my Maimah, look at L'chol Tichla for this particular point. There's all these ideas start fitting into place a lot more. But at the moment, we have what we have here. And if we really want to get to the depths of it, we'll be here forever. So we're going to move on. Okay? So all you need to know for the moment, we had a mashal of a king being crowned. And we said the greatness of the king is through this coronation. And the coronation is because of the people. Similarly, Lamaila, the supernal king, which is Zohar Atzilus, it becomes greater by wearing a crown, by having a Gilui of Kesav Atzilus. And the reason it has a Gilui of Kesav Atzilus is because of Malchus. For the purpose of Malchus. Okay? So must mean, just like we said in the previous Miyomayim, that Malchus is a higher madrega, a deeper madrega than Zoh. If everything is because of Malchus, yeah? If Dibur was able to impact Seichel and Midas, if the Guf is able to impact the Neshama, then we concluded that the Guf and the Dibur, they must be deeper and rooted deeper than the Neshama and the Seichel and Midas. Similarly too, Malchus is rooted deeper than Zoh. Okay?
Yeah, but a bit of a stupid question, but so humans, because they can speak, they have intellectual thoughts. If, let's say, a horse could speak, would it be a lot more intellectual than it is currently, just neighing?
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
So is the reason why animals are more smart than a stone, for example, daemon, because they can communicate?
To an extent, maybe.
More.
Yeah. I'm not a mumcha. V'hainu. So, Tesvav. Next paragraph. V'hainu mitasheirish hamalchus she b'sharsha l'mayla mib'chin Zoh. And this is all because of the more primordial source of Malchus than for Zoh. Uki Yudua, like it is known, the Sheirish HaMalchus hu beradlo, bereisha deloi isyado. Okay? Bereisha deloi isyado. The origin that is not knowable. It's a darga, a pnimius hakesa, we refer to as Beradla, Bereshit Leis Yado, the beginning that is, in the Sifri Kabbalah there's 3 different Roshim, talks about Reisha, Beloi Reisha, Bereshit Loi Yoda, and Bereshit Loi Is Yado.
We had it in Gemara, this was the name of something like Cain Badla. So maybe they're connected.
Maybe. So, the Sheirish of Malchus is in Radla and the Reishad Leis Yada. What's the inyan of Reishad Leis Yada? Reishad Leis Yada is a Heder HaMetzias. It's Leis Yada, it's not known. It's complete Darga of Bittul. It's the most pneumistic Madrega in Kesa. Now, and that means that the Sheirish of Malchus is higher than Zoh. Now, what about this? We usually say that Zoh also has a Sheirish in Kesa. Dagam, even though it says in the Sifri Kabbalah, the Zoh Gam came Ba'atika Achid V'Talya. The Zoh is also Meyuchad, is connected, and is dependent or hanging in Atik. That would suggest that it also has a Sheirish in Keser. So why are we saying that Malchus has a deeper Sheirish in Keser than Zoh? Yesh Leimar, the Einim Bechinas Atik Mamish. That when we say that Zoh has a Sheirish in Keser, we don't mean in Atik Mamish, in Pnimius HaKeser, ki im Bechinas Arich Ampin, but rather in Chitzonius HaKeser, which we call Arich Ampin. The Arich Ampin me Atik, and Arich Ampin comes from Atik. So that's why the statement says Gamkin Ba'atika Achid Italia, that even though Zoh is really mushrish in Arich Ampin, nevertheless we say it's Achid Italia in Atik because Arich Ampin comes from Atik. K'mishkosu Beis Chaim Sha Arich Ampin Perk Ches. The Mashakosuf Zoh Ba'atika Achid Italia. It says there in Yechayeinu that Zoh, when we say it's Achid Vitalia in Atik, Haynuki Zoh Yoinik Mikesa Arich Ampin, explains that Zoh receives its Chayas, is Nishtalshul from where Arich Ampin. Arich Ampin Mimoicha da Atika Kadisha, and Arich Ampin receives its Chayas from the Darga of Moichin of Atika Kadisha, Ayidei Hamazal Hayerd Misham, through a channel that descends from there. And for this we say it's only Talia. We don't say it's Achid. It's medakdik that on the one hand it's Achid in Arich Ampin, but its relationship with Atik is only Talia. The regarding its hashpah that it receives and its association with Arich Ampin, the dargas of the lower dargas. In the lower half of Tiferes we say the term Achid. It's connected there. Taka Q Achid Shamamish Benahid Arich Ampin. It truly is Achid there. Abu Mashi Yonik Mekesed Arich Ampin Hurak Talia. And that which it also receives hashpah from the Kesed of Arich Ampin, which is we described was the darga of Moicha da Atika Kadisha, that is only Talia, V'loi Achid Mamish. So, in the complexities of where the origins of these spheres are, notwithstanding the fact that we say the Zohar is Achid Betalia in Atika Kadisha, it's understood through the Sifri Kabbalah that it's more specifically in Arich Ampin, and whereas Malchus is mushrish in Radlo in Pnimius Akese. Ubechinas Malchus to Shoshe Beradlo Yesh Leimash Ubechinas Atmas Atik. The darg of Radlo Reishad Leis Yado is the very essence of Atik. V'gam Yesh Leimash Ubechinas Achid, and Malchus is their Achid, is one and the same thing. Ukamaima, like we say, and this we say in before Shabbos every week, Kesa Elyon Ihu Kesa Malchus. Very important. Kesa Elyon, Ihu Kesa Malchus. So there's an intrinsic connection between Malchus and Kesa.
Where does Chabad come from?
Can we stick in? Yeah? We just said Chachma is Yechayeinu from Kesa. I said before. Sorry, Bechinas Kesa Elyon, Ihu Kesa Malchus Mamish. And just like we described in the Shtalshlus Haksarim, that each Kesa has a connection to each other. So the Kesa Elyon, the supernal Kesa Vatzilus, is Kesa Malchus, with the addition of Mamish. Malchus Vatzilus Nasa Bechinas Atik Lebria. And that's why the Malchus of Atzilus produces the Darga of Atik of Bria, of Kesa of Bria. Because Malchus is itself a part of the Ksarim, the Darga of Ksarim. In order for Malchus to be able to produce and create the Darga of Kesa of Bria, we must say that Malchus itself has a Darga of Atik in it. Otherwise it won't be able to reproduce Ksarim. And from this we can also understand what we described above. If you remember, back in the first Maimah, the letters of speech, we said, are superior to the emotional faculties. So comparably, in our case, just like everything we explained in the previous Maimah, can support us in understanding the way it is Lamaila, that Malchus, which is called Dibra Elyon, is rooted deeper than Zah. Okay. So here we're talking about the Sheirish of Zah and Malchus in Keser of Atzilus. Now we're going to talk about before the Tzimtzum. Every Darga originates from somewhere. And in that too, in the Sheirish, in Lifnei HaTzimtzum, in the Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Malchus is mushrosh deeper than Zah. So K'moikein have Sheirish Shorshem be'Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum Gamkein, Sheirish HaMalchus l'maylish m'Sheirish HaZah. If we want to go to much earlier and prior even to creation, when everything of creation was mushrosh, was back in its sheirish, even there was a distinction between Malchus and Zah. The Malchus mushreshes bebechinas ein seif atzmus u'mahush l'may lagam meha'ir hakol b'atzmusa. Malchus is rooted and originates in the very essence of Hashem, prior to even the Eir Hakol Ba'atzmusay. Remember this darga. Eir Hakol Ba'atzmusay. An Eir, so it's not Etzem, it's Eir, it's already a Gilu Eir. But the Eir, the way is Kolul, included and absorbed within the essence. It's a darga. Eir Hakol Ba'atzmusay. We're not going to go into it now. It's going to become a significant level and distinction when we get to the last minor, which Be'ezras Hashem we will get to. But Eir HaKol Ba'atzmusay is stunning memory. But the point it's trying to make over here, without getting sidetracked into the details, is that Malchus, even at its very, very origin, has an advantage and a superiority to Zah. Dari bechinas Malchus mahave me'ayin yesh. And we see this empirically. We see this in the way things actually pan out. So Malchus of Atzilus creates things. And it creates them me'ayin yesh. Not like in the ayin of yesh of Chochmah of Atzilus from Keser to Atzilus, which we called is like a yesh ma'ayin. But Chochmah of Atzilus is not really a yesh. Not a real yesh. The beginning of real yeshus is in Olam Habriya. So Malchus of Atzilus is the very starting point of existence, of material, physical existence. Not that Olam Habriya is material yet. That you have to wait till Olam HaAsiyah. But the original possibility for Metzias Yesh is the beginning of Olam Habriya. And who creates Olam Habriya? Which darga facilitates the creation of Olam Habriya? Malchus of Atzilus. Malchus mahave ma'ayin yesh. The Ika Yeshus hu b'biyah. Because we're going to talk about Yeshus, real Yesh ma'ayin, that only really begins in the worlds of Bria Tzir Nasiyah. The Hisavas him b'chinas Malchus Atzilus. And that is brought about the function of Hashem, which creates, is Malchus of Atzilus. Zah da Atzilus does not create. Chochmah da Atzilus does not create. Malchus of Atzilus creates. The Mashaveh Chochmah mi'ayin timotze. That which we said before, that Chochmah is also yesh me'ayin from Keser of Atzilus. Ein zeh b'chinas yesh mamish. That's not a real yesh. Kim b'chinas yesh netzal. That's the big difference between Atzilus and Bria. Yesh netzal. And a netzal is something which is not entirely new. It's more of a gila helam. So relatively speaking, we call it yesh me'ayin, but really it's not yesh me'ayin in the truest sense, because it's not a yesh. It's not a separate entity. It's completely bottled. Chochmah is completely aware of its origin, and it's completely bottled. The Chochmah of Atzilus is the awareness, the hu levadei hu ve'ein zolase, which is not the case once you get a yesh nivra, which thinks ani v'afsiyot, I'm the only thing. There's nothing else besides me. I created myself. It's yusi mi'atzmusi. Nothing is making me exist. I sustain myself. I'm self-sustaining. That's a yesh nivra. Yesh netzel doesn't have that. It's not a real yesh. Al b'chinas yesh mamish hu masha malchus ta'atzilus mahave b'chinas yesh debriya. We're talking about yesh mamish. That's all set in motion through the process of malchus of atzilus creating Olam Habriya. v'yadua, like it is known. Truly, who has the capacity to create something else, a separate entity? Only the Eibishter has that power. Why? Because all of the Giluyim from Hashem, what are they a Giluy of? They're a revelation of, they're harking back to the oneness, and they're revealing the omnipotence, the omniscience of Hashem. The hu levadei hu ve'ein zu lasei, ein od milvadei. That's what the Eir is doing. All the Eiris of Hashem are doing that. And these Eiris, they came from somewhere. They originated from somewhere, right? Where did they originate from? From Hashem. So they only know about things, that their whole concept of reality is being reliant on Hashem. They're dovuk in Hashem. From them, the idea that they would be able to fathom the notion of something being separate from Hashem, they can't fathom such a thing, because there only is Hashem. Ein od milvadei. They don't have the capacity to process that. Only Hashem has a notion of something existing without anything existing before it. Itself, Hashem himself is the only thing that doesn't have something that caused him to exist. So in order to create something else, a yesh, what is the pshat a yesh? Yesh is something that thinks that only they exist and nothing makes it exist. How do you give someone the sensibility, the feeling, however false it might be, but at least the self, that self-awareness? An Eir, normally the Eiris, the Giluyim of Hashem, can't tell anyone else and explain to somebody else how to be in a manner that is unaware of its source. Because that's the whole thing of an Eir. Eir is me'ein ha'moy. Eir is dovuk in its moy. Eir is always connected to its moy. So it can't tell anything else how to be independent. The only thing that's independent is Hashem. So to create independent things, only Hashem can do that. Right? Tuhu levadi b'keicha v'yicholtri lahavis me'ayin liyesh mishum de mitziyusa mi'atzmusi b'li shum ilu v'sibah akidemes leichas v'shalim. If you remember when we learned Igeres HaKodesh Siman Chaf, I told you this is probably the most repeated line of Chassidus in the whole of Chassidus. This line from Igeres HaKodesh Siman Chaf, Tuhu levadi b'keicha v'yicholtri lahavis yesh me'ayin. Only Hashem has the ability to create things yesh me'ayin, because he is mitziyusim yatzmusay, he is a truly independent being, without any other cause preceding him, God forbid. And that gives him the ability to create things similarly that feel like there's nothing else preceding it. They can create things that feel independent, like ourselves, or a tree, or a table, or a house. There can be such a thing as an existence that is unaware of any immediate cause for its continued existence. Like it's explained. Yeah. So who has the power to create things? Specifically the Eibishter, the Atmas HaMo'eh, the source of all light. The koyach ze yesh b'malchus. And who also has this ability that we see b'poyel? Creation doesn't happen from Atmas Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum. B'poyel mamash, who creates the yesh? The yesh HaNivra, Malchus of Atzilus. So what must we conclude? That Malchus of Atzilus is one and the same, or rather is intimately connected, or is a keli itself for Atmas Ein Sof. So the koyach ze yesh b'malchus lahavis ma'ayin yesh. Hainu mishum. Why is that the case? The bechinas malchus mushreshes ba'atzmas mamish, because malchus is itself mushresh in the very essence of Hashem. L'mayla mishayrish azah. The shosha ba'ein seish lifnei hatzimtzum hu bechinas ispashtus v'gilui, which is much higher than the shayrish of zah, because zah's shayrish in ein seish lifnei hatzimtzum He's already in the Oir, which is in the Eifon of Ispashtus, like I described. Oir, which for it is anathema that there should be a Yesha Nivra. Yesha Nivra is a stira to its existence. Only the Eibishter can fathom a notion of independence, and therefore he can afford other existences with independence. So who is aware of that? Dafka Malchus. Because Malchus is Mushrish and Atmos are in safe.
Don't you see too much of a difference between Malchus and Zah? Because Malchus isn't directly Mushrish and Atmos.
It is.
Isn't it directly Mushrish?
Hainu Mishum, to begin as Malchus, no, we're talking about, we said.
Mushrish and Atik, and even deeper, it's Mushrish and Atmos.
It's Sheirush Rishon. The very origin of Malchus.
And the Sheirush Rishon is also Malchus, also Atmos.
No. It's in the Aaron, it says over here. Sheirush Hazah is in the Spashtus for Gilu'ay.
Which comes from?
So you're saying everything originates in Atmos.
Yeah, the same way Malchus originated in Atmos.
The question is...
okay, Malchus is Megala that Atmos more because it does do the practical Yechayeinu, Bria and stuff.
The emergence of a notion of Zah only begins on the Darg of Ispashtus and Gilu'ay. In Atmos Ein Sof, it's completely mufrach, out of the question anything else. Even the etzim is not mufrach in a gilu. Etzim doesn't have to be miskala. It's a gilu ritzoinus. Decided to. Maybe should decide to be miskala. So you could say, okay, so therefore the gilu is mushrish and etzim because it was mushrish in sort of in the yechayeinu to be miskala. So it's not quite that thing. So the identity of Zah, or the characteristics of Zah that Zah ultimately manifests in Zah of Atzilus, are only characteristics that first emerge on the dagger of the Ein Sof, the dagger of Ispashtus and Gilu'ay. Whereas Malchus demonstrates qualities which are only extant in Atmos Ein Sof. The quality of creation to produce a yesh, which is only bechikaber, only Eibush can do that. Only Atmos Ein Sof can do that. So the fact that Malchus can do it demonstrates to us that it's mushrish in Atmos.
In a deeper way than anything else.
The nimtza. So we get our nimtza at the end of this long, difficult paragraph. What is our nimtza? The sheirish ha-malchus ulamayla mi-sheirish hazah. That's what you need to know. The sheirish of malchus is deep in the sheirish. We haven't explained why. We haven't explained how. A little bit, we've got an inkling of what qualities Zah has. But the makabel over here is deeply connected to the most fundamental dargas in Elikus. So now we're going to just say something about Rosh Hashanah. So on Rosh Hashanah, what's Rosh Hashanah all about? It's about Binyan HaMalchus. In Kabbalah we understand that the day of Rosh Hashanah is a day of Binyan HaMalchus, of constructing Malchus, because we know Malchus leis lo migamar klum. Malchus itself doesn't have any eres of its own. Its parts of its binyan, its structure has to be created from the spheres shalamayla mimena, right? From Zah, usually it's makabel from Zah and makabel from Meichin. So on Rosh Hashanah, when you have binyan HaMalchus, it's done differently. The binyan of Malchus, every day there's a binyan of Malchus. Constantly there's a binyan of Malchus. But on Rosh Hashanah, it's done in a much more fundamental way. Nasu Meichin lenukva shelo al yidei Zah. Malchus receives its own Meichin, so in its parts of. So in Malchus you have Chacham Bina Das Chesed Word First Nesta Hojisoid, all of Malchus, right? So usually you'd have the Seder Shtalshlus, just like all the other spheres have it. So the Yisoid of Atzilus, which has its own whole parts of, through the Darga of Malchus, the Yisoid, be Nishtalshul, all of the Dargas into Malchus of Atzilus. Yeah? That would be the Seder Harogel. On Rosh Hashanah, the moichin of nukva, the chochmah bin adas of Malchus, is shaloi al yidei zah. It's received not through the root of zah. Zah, it's not the conduit, is not the provider. Ki'im mibechinas habina. Ki'im mibechinas habina atzma. They get it direct from bina. So it's an aliyah for Malchus. Ordinarily, you'd have the eiris would be nishtalshel to Malchus would be eiris which are more metzumtzum. On Rosh Hashanah, Malchus receives its meichin directly from the meichin of Atzilus, from bina of Atzilus. And this is how Rosh Hashanah is different from all other Yom Tovim. The B'chol Yom Tov is galas meichin ava benukva. Ela shem al yidei. Ordinarily on a Yom Tov there's a gilui of the meichin of Atzilus ava abba ve'ema in Malchus. Ela shem al yidei, but it comes through a hishtalshlus through zah. Ubereish Hashanah nimshachim gilu ha-meichin sheloi al yidei zah. Whereas on Rosh Hashanah it comes directly from the meichin themselves and not through the intermediary of zah. So v'yesh leimar dainu lefi shesherish ha-malchus u'lemayla mizah. We can say that this idea of Rosh Hashanah, which actually is in a mime, I think, of this week in the Kotitera. No. Yeah, Pashas Tova, yeah. There's a mime this week in your Rosh Hashanah where this is discussed. So this idea, Rosh Hashanah, can also relate to what we're talking about here. Because Malchus is superior to Zah. Lachem b'binyan Malchus, avo ba'atzman bonula. We say that Abba ve'ema themselves build it. Because Malchus doesn't have to receive from Zah because it has a deeper shadish. Okay. If you want, you can look up the Maimon this week in Kotitera. And it's known that the meichin themselves are not really the origin of the meichin. Everything emanates from the darga shelamayla mi'ameichin. K'meshikosa beis chaim sha'ameichin tetzelem perik beis. V'ayimashkos b'kedetera ba'abiyah de'v'nikdashti. V'hainu the sheidish hemshekh hi me'ein seif atzim sumhus. That really the hemshekh, we'd say that the hemshekh comes from bina, just like we said before that the atara that comes into Zah comes from bina, but not really from bina. It comes from higher than bina. Similarly, the hemshekh that we're talking about, the binyan HaMalchus, is originating from Atmos Amuhus. So Shamu Shesh is Bechinas HaMalchus. Malchus gets its binyan, it's constructed from a Gilu Eir that comes from the very Etzem. V'nimshach b'Malchus l'tzerich binyanim mitzad sharsha shaloi al yidei Zah. So it doesn't have to go through Zah. That's the whole thing of Rosh Hashanah, that when you're trying to recreate the world, we need to have a Malchus, not a Malchus that is just a hemshekh, a continuation in Seder Shtalshlus from Zah, and it's just a recipient from Zah and secondary and peripheral to Zah, but rather it has to be acknowledged that the Malchus is the true driver of creation, and that we have to reveal the shadish of Malchus in its origin in Atzmos Amuhus. Okay? Now, in the paragraphs here, it gives you a whole paragraph here. I'm going to just do half of this paragraph. The way it is they split up the paragraphs. I think they split it up wrong, or not so well. There should be a divider, and this should have carried on from the previous. Anyway, you'll see where I'm going to stop. Now going back to what we originally introduced, the pasuk from She'ashirim. This is the crown which his mother crowned him with on the day, specifically on the day of his wedding. And we said that this refers to the king Zah of Atzilus, who receives its crown, the Kesser of Atzilus, through Bina, specifically on the day of his wedding, when it comes into union and association and connection with Malchus. The possibility that there should be a hamshacha of Kesser in Zah is facilitated, is made possible, is achieved through Malchus. The Tzedek Hashpah Malchus, and all for the sake of Malchus. Not just for make the king great. Let's make Zah great. No. In order for Malchus to get what it needs, Malchus needs to create things. And it needs Zah. This is why this section, whole section, is going to become so important. you're going to see also in the mashal we're going to give of Ish v'Isha, and especially when we get to the later end of the Miyomayim, we're going to fundamentally explain why do we need Zah? If Malchus is so good, if you can sidestep and avoid Zah, why do we need Zah in the first place? Just go straight to Malchus. Why do we need, and we're going to ask the question then, why do we need men if women can create children and women do the whole thing? Why do we need men? What's the purpose of the man? If she's doing the whole thing, who needs men? Who needs fathers? Just have mothers. That's the sort of question we're going to be asking. Because we've completely flipped the value system. We used to think the value was Zah was superior to Malchus. And we have to explain what's Malchus for. We used to think that Seichel was what's important. We have to explain why do we need Dibble. We used to think that men were important. That's why you have to ask why do we need women. So now we're explaining that everything is the Tzerich the Makabel. And we're going to have to explain, but when Malchus gives a boost to Zah by allowing it to have a Kesser. But why does Malchus want it to have a Kesser? Because it also needs the hemshekh from Kesser. So it's using it as a conduit, it's using it as a mediator, a medium to achieve its relationships with Kesser Batzilus. So we can be Megala, the relationship of Kesser Elyin, who Kesser Malchus. So Zah also has to have a Kesser in order for the whole project to work. So after we've built up on Rosh Hashanah a perfect Malchus, there needs to be this yichud of zun, which we're going to ask, why do we need a yichud zun at all? Why can't we just stay with Malchus? We're going to explain. But here we're just saying the fundamentals of the idea. So when there needs to be the yichud zun, the unit, the hashpah from Zah into Malchus, zun, zacha, unukeva, yeah? V'hu sheyi hashpah mizah lemalchus, kfi oif and seidish tashas, and we need this all in order to make Seidish Talshalas work in a much more enhanced way, an effective way. We need to have the hemshekh of the Torah into the hemshekh of Kesser into Zah. Am l'tzerich hashpah tzarich liyas nimshah b'chinas haTorah anal. Shu inyan b'chinas hashpah atzmis. And hini hemshekh zois hi al yidei b'chinas malchus. So in order for the yichud zun to be fruitful, for there to be a useful union between the male and female of Atzilus, Zah and Malchus of Atzilus, such that it can be the birth of a child, the creation, namely the creation of the worlds, Zah has to up its game. Zah, the role that Zah plays in the yichud with Malchus, which then brings about the creation of the world, Zah has to be more than it ordinarily is. It needs to have a kesser. So Malchus gives it a kesser. Malchus facilitates the Zah to have a kesser. And then Zah can do its job, which we're going to elaborate again a lot more as we go through. What function Zah is fulfilling over here. But still, at the end of the day, everything is being manipulated by Malchus. Malchus is the cause and the reason for everything. And that was in a long-winded way, in a difficult shtickle, is what it wants to emphasize. And we're going to see this now going forward in the mashal with Ish v'Isha, and then we'll see with Yisrael and Torah.